This video is for educational purposes. Glasgow is the most populous city in Scotland, and is the third most populous city in the United Kingdom, as well as being the 27th largest city by population in Europe. In 2022, it had an estimated population as a defined locality of 632,350 and anchored an urban settlement of 1,028,220. Formed as a county of itself in 1893, the city had previously been in the historic county of Lanarkshire, or Clydesdale, and has also grown to include settlements that were once part of Renfrewshire and Dunbartonshire, or the Lennox. It now forms the Glasgow City Council area, one of the 32 council areas of Scotland, and is administered by Glasgow City Council. Kindly subscribe to this channel and share this video with your friends and families. Glasgow has the largest economy in Scotland and the third highest GDP per capita of any city in the UK. Glasgow's major cultural institutions enjoy international reputations, including the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland, Burrell Collection, Kelvingrove Art Gallery and Museum, Royal Scottish National Orchestra, BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra, Scottish Ballet and Scottish Opera. The city was the European Capital of Culture in 1990 and is notable for its architecture, culture, media, music scene, sports clubs and transport connections. It is the fifth most visited city in the United Kingdom. The city hosted the 2021 United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP26, at its main events venue. The SEC Centre Glasgow hosted the 2014 Commonwealth Games and the first European Championships in 2018, and was one of the host cities for UEFA Euro 2020. The city is also well known in the sporting world for football, particularly for the Old Firm rivalry. Glasgow grew from a small rural settlement close to Glasgow Cathedral and descending to the River Clyde to become the largest seaport in Scotland, and 10th largest by tonnage in Britain. Expanding from the medieval bishopric and episcopal burgh, subsequently royal burgh, and the later establishment of the University of Glasgow in the 15th century, it became a major centre of the Scottish Enlightenment in the 18th century. From the 18th century onwards, the city also grew as one of Britain's main hubs of oceanic trade with North America and the West Indies, soon followed by the Orient, India, and China. With the onset of the Industrial Revolution, the population and economy of Glasgow and the surrounding region expanded rapidly to become one of the world's preeminent centres of chemicals, textiles and engineering, most notably in the shipbuilding and marine engineering industry, which produced many innovative and famous vessels. Glasgow was the second city of the British Empire for much of the Victorian and Edwardian eras. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Glasgow's population grew rapidly, reaching a peak of 1,127,825 people in 1938, with a higher density and within a smaller territory than in subsequent decades. The population was greatly reduced following comprehensive urban renewal projects in the 1960s, which resulted in large-scale relocation of people to designated new towns, such as Cumbernauld, Livingston, East Kilbride and peripheral suburbs, followed by successive boundary changes. Over 1 million people live in the Greater Glasgow contiguous urban area, while the wider Glasgow City region is home to over 1,800,000 people, equating to around 33% of Scotland's population. The city has one of the highest densities of any locality in Scotland at 4023/km2. The name Glasgow is Brittonic in origin. The first element glas, meaning grey-green, grey-blue, both in Brittonic, Scottish Gaelic and modern-day Welsh, and the second *ku, hollow, cf Welsh Glasgow, giving a meaning of green hollow. The green hollow may refer to the ravine to the east of Glasgow Cathedral. It is often said that the name means Dear Green Place, or that Dear Green Place is a translation from Gaelic Glas Caim. The Dear Green Place remains an affectionate way of referring to the city. The modern Gaelic is Glashu and derived from the same roots as the Brittonic. The settlement may have an earlier Brittonic name, Cathars. The modern name appears for the first time in the Gaelic period, 1116, as Glasgow. It is also recorded that the King of Strathclyde, Riddarch Hale, welcomed Saint Kentigern, also known as Saint Mungo, and procured his consecration as bishop about 540. For some 13 years Kentigern laboured in the region, building his church at the Molendinar Burn where Glasgow Cathedral now stands, and making many converts. A large community developed around him and became known as Glasgow. The coat of arms of the city of Glasgow was granted to the Royal Burgh by the Lord Lion on October 25, 1866. It incorporates a number of symbols and emblems associated with the life of Glasgow's patron saint, Mungo, which had been used on official seals prior to that date. The emblems represent miracles supposed to have been performed by Mungo and are listed in the traditional rhyme. Here's the bird that never flew. Here's the tree that never grew. Here's the bell that never rang. Here's the fish that never swam. St. Mungo is also said to have preached a sermon containing the words, "Lord, let Glasgow flourish by the preaching of the word and the praising of thy name." This was abbreviated to "Let Glasgow flourish" and adopted as the city's motto. In 1450, John Stewart, the first Lord Provost of Glasgow, left an endowment so that a St. Mungo's bell could be made and tolled throughout the city so that the citizens would pray for his soul. A new bell was purchased by the magistrates in 1641, and that bell is still on display in the People's Palace Museum, near Glasgow Green. The supporters are two salmon-bearing rings, and the crest is a half-length figure of St. Mungo. He wears a bishop's mitre and liturgical vestments and has his hand raised in the act of benediction. The original 1866 grant placed the crest atop a helm, but this was removed in subsequent grants. The current version, 1996, has a gold mural crown between the shield and the crest. This form of coronet, resembling an embattled city wall, was allowed to the 4 area councils with city status. The arms were rematriculated by the City of Glasgow District Council on February 6, 1975, and by the present Area Council on March 25, 1996. The only change made on each occasion was in the type of coronet over the arms. The area around Glasgow has hosted communities for millennia, with the River Clyde providing a natural location for fishing. The Romans later built outposts in the area and, to protect Roman Britannia from the Brittonic-speaking, Celtic, Caledonians, constructed the Antonine Wall. Items from the wall, such as altars from Roman forts like Balmuildy, can be found at the Hunterian Museum today. Glasgow itself was reputed to have been founded by the Christian missionary St. Mungo in the 6th century. He established a church on the Molendener Burn, where the present Glasgow Cathedral stands, and in the following years Glasgow became a religious centre. Glasgow grew over the following centuries. The Glasgow Fair reportedly began in 1190. A bridge over the River Clyde was recorded from around 1285, where Victoria Bridge now stands. As the lowest bridging point on the Clyde, it was an important crossing. The area around the bridge became known as Briggate. The founding of the University of Glasgow adjoining the cathedral in 1451 and elevation of the bishopric to become the Archdiocese of Glasgow in 1492 increased the town's religious and educational status and landed wealth. Its early trade was in agriculture, brewing and fishing, with cured salmon and herring being exported to Europe and the Mediterranean. By the 15th century, the urban area stretched from the area around the cathedral and university in the north down to the bridge and the banks of the Clyde in the south along High Street, Saltmarket and Bridgegate, crossing an east-west route at Glasgow Cross, which became the commercial centre of the city. Following the European Protestant Reformation and with the encouragement of the Convention of Royal Burghs, the 14 incorporated trade crafts federated as the Trades House in 1605 to match the power and influence in the town council of the earlier merchants' guilds who established their merchants' house in the same year. Glasgow was subsequently raised to the status of Royal Burgh in 1611. Daniel Defoe visited the city in the early 18th century and famously opined in his book A Tour Through the Whole Island of Great Britain, that Glasgow was the cleanest and beautifulest and best built city in Britain, London excepted. At that time the city's population was about 12,000, and the city was yet to undergo the massive expansionary changes to its economy and urban fabric, brought about by the Scottish Enlightenment and Industrial Revolution. The city prospered from its involvement in the triangular trade and the Atlantic slave trade that the former depended upon. Glasgow merchants dealt in slave-produced cash crops such as sugar, tobacco, cotton and linen. From 1717 to 1766, Scottish slave ships operating out of Glasgow transported approximately 3,000 enslaved Africans to the Americas, out of a total number of 5,000 slaves carried by ships from Scotland. The majority of these slaving voyages left from Glasgow's satellite ports, Greenock and Port Glasgow. Kindly subscribe to this channel and share this video with your friends and families. After the Acts of Union in 1707, Scotland gained further access to the vast markets of the new British Empire, and Glasgow became prominent as a hub of international trade to and from the Americas, especially in sugar, tobacco, cotton, and manufactured goods. Starting in 1668, the city's tobacco lords created a deep water port at Port Glasgow about 20 miles, 32 kilometers, down the River Clyde, as the river from the city to that point was then too shallow for seagoing merchant ships. By the late 18th century, more than half of the British tobacco trade was concentrated on the River Clyde, with over £47 million, 21,000 t, of tobacco being imported each year at its peak. At the time, Glasgow held a commercial importance as the city participated in the trade of sugar, tobacco, and later cotton. From the mid-18th century the city began expanding westwards from its medieval core at Glasgow Cross, with a gridiron street plan starting from the 1770s and eventually reaching George Square to accommodate much of the growth, with that expansion much later becoming known in the 1980s onwards as the Merchant City. The largest growth in the city centre area, building on the wealth of trading internationally, was the next expansion being the gridiron streets west of Buchanan Street riding up and over Blytheswood Hill from 1800 onwards. The opening of the Monkland Canal and basin linking to the Forth and Clyde Canal at Port Dundas in 1795 facilitated access to the extensive iron ore and coal mines in Lanarkshire. After extensive river engineering projects to dredge and deepen the River Clyde as far as Glasgow, shipbuilding became a major industry on the upper stretches of the river, pioneered by industrialists such as Robert Napier, John Elder, George Thomson, Sir William Pierce and Sir Alfred Yarrow. The River Clyde also became an important source of inspiration for artists, such as John Atkinson Grimshaw, John Knox, James Kay, Sir Muirhead Bone, Robert Eady and L.S. Lowry, willing to depict the new industrial era and the modern world, as did Stanley Spencer downriver at Port Glasgow. Glasgow's population had surpassed that of Edinburgh by 1821. The development of civic institutions included the City of Glasgow Police in 1800, one of the first municipal police forces in the world. Despite the crisis caused by the City of Glasgow Bank's collapse in 1878, growth continued and by the end of the 19th century it was one of the cities known as the second city of the empire and was producing more than half Britain's tonnage of shipping and a quarter of all locomotives in the world. In addition to its preeminence in shipbuilding, engineering, industrial machinery, bridge building, chemicals, explosives, coal and oil industries, it developed as a major center in textiles, garment making, carpet manufacturing, leather processing, furniture making, pottery, food, drink and cigarette making, printing and publishing. Shipping, banking, insurance and professional services expanded at the same time. Glasgow became one of the first cities in Europe to reach a population of 1 million. The city's new trades and sciences attracted new residents from across the Lowlands and the Highlands of Scotland, from Ireland and other parts of Britain and from continental Europe. During this period, the construction of many of the city's greatest architectural masterpieces and most ambitious civil engineering projects, such as the Mulgai Water Treatment Works, Glasgow Subway, Glasgow Corporation Tramways, City Chambers, Mitchell Library and Kelvingrove Art Gallery and Museum were being funded by its wealth. The city also held a series of international exhibitions at Kelvingrove Park in 1888, 1901 and 1911, with Britain's last major international exhibition, the Empire Exhibition, being subsequently held in 1938 at Bellahouston Park, which drew 13 million visitors. The 20th century witnessed both decline and renewal in the city. After World War I, the city suffered from the impact of the post-World War I recession and from the later Great Depression. This also led to a rise of radical socialism and the Red Clydeside movement. The city had recovered by the outbreak of World War II. The city saw aerial bombardment by the Luftwaffe during the Clydebank Blitz, during the war, then grew through the post-war boom that lasted through the 1950s. By the 1960s, growth of industry in countries like Japan and West Germany weakened the once preeminent position of many of the city's industries. As a result of this, Glasgow entered a lengthy period of relative economic decline and rapid deindustrialization, leading to high unemployment, urban decay, population decline, welfare dependency and poor health for the city's inhabitants. There were active attempts at regeneration of the city, when the Glasgow Corporation published its controversial Bruce Report, which set out a comprehensive series of initiatives aimed at turning round the decline of the city. The report led to a huge and radical program of rebuilding and regeneration efforts that started in the mid-1950s and lasted into the late 1970s. This involved the mass demolition of the city's infamous slums and their replacement with large suburban housing estates and tower blocks. The city invested heavily in roads infrastructure, with an extensive system of arterial roads and motorways that bisected the central area. There are also accusations that the Scottish Office had deliberately attempted to undermine Glasgow's economic and political influence in post-war Scotland by diverting inward investment in new industries to other regions during the Silicon Glen boom and creating the new towns of Cumbernauld, Glenrothes, Irvine, Livingston and East Kilbride, dispersed across the Scottish lowlands to have the city's population base. By the late 1980s, there had been a significant resurgence in Glasgow's economic fortunes. The Glasgow's Miles Better campaign, launched in 1983, an opening of the Burrell Collection in 1983 and Scottish Exhibition and Conference Centre in 1985 facilitated Glasgow's new role as a European centre for business services and finance and promoted an increase in tourism and inward investment. The latter continues to be bolstered by the legacy of the city's Glasgow Garden Festival in 1988, its status as European Capital of Culture in 1990, and concerted attempts to diversify the city's economy. However, it is the industrial heritage that serves as key tourism enabler. Wider economic revival has persisted, and the ongoing regeneration of inner-city areas, including the large-scale Clyde waterfront regeneration, has led to more affluent people moving back to live in the center of Glasgow, fueling allegations of gentrification. In 2008, the city was listed by Lonely Planet as one of the world's top 10 tourist cities. Despite Glasgow's economic renaissance, the east end of the city remains the focus of social deprivation. A Glasgow economic audit report published in 2007 stated that the gap between prosperous and deprived areas of the city is widening. In 2006, 47% of Glasgow's population lived in the most deprived 15% of areas in Scotland, while the Centre for Social Justice reported 29.4% of the city's working-age residents to be economically inactive. Although marginally behind the UK average, Glasgow still has a higher employment rate than Birmingham, Liverpool, and Manchester. In 2008, the city was ranked at 43 for personal safety in the Mercer Index of top 50 safest cities in the world. The Mercer report was specifically looking at quality of living, yet by 2011 within Glasgow, certain areas were, still, failing to meet the Scottish air quality objective levels for nitrogen dioxide, NO2, and particulate matter, PM10. With the population growing, the first scheme to provide a public water supply was by the Glasgow Company in 1806. A second company was formed in 1812, and the two merged in 1838, but there was some dissatisfaction with the quality of the water supplied. The Gorbals Gravitation Water Company began supplying water to residents living to the south of the River Clyde in 1846, obtained from reservoirs, which gave 75,000 people a constant water supply, but others were not so fortunate, and some 4,000 died in an outbreak of cholera in 1848–1849. This led to the development of the Glasgow Corporation Waterworks, with a project to raise the level of Loch Katrine and to convey clean water by gravity along a 26 miles (42 kilometers) aqueduct to a holding reservoir at Mulgai, and then by pipes into the city. The project cost £980,000 and was opened by Queen Victoria in 1859. In the early 19th century, an eighth of the people lived in single-room accommodation. The engineer for the project was John Frederick Bateman, while James Morris Gale became the resident engineer for the city section of the project, and subsequently became engineer-in-chief for Glasgow Water Commissioners. He oversaw several improvements during his tenure, including a second aqueduct and further raising of water levels in Loch Katrine. Additional supplies were provided by Loch Arklet in 1902, by impounding the water and creating a tunnel to allow water to flow into Loch Katrine. A similar scheme to create a reservoir in Glen Finglas was authorized in 1903, but was deferred, and was not completed until 1965. Following the 2002 Glasgow floods, the waterborne parasite Cryptosporidium was found in the reservoir at Mulgai, and so the new Mulgai Water Treatment Works was built. It was opened by Queen Elizabeth in 2007, and won the 2007 Utility Industry Achievement Award, having been completed ahead of its time schedule and for £10 million below its budgeted cost. Good health requires both clean water and effective removal of sewage. The Caledonian Railway rebuilt many of the sewers, as part of a deal to allow them to tunnel under the city, and sewage treatment works were opened at Dalmarnock in 1894, Dalmuir in 1904, and Shieldhall in 1910. The works experimented to find better ways to treat sewage, and a number of experimental filters were constructed, until a full activated sludge plant was built between 1962 and 1968 at a cost of £4 million. Treated sludge was dumped at sea, and Glasgow Corporation owned 6 sludge ships between 1904 and 1998, when the EU Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive ended the practice. The sewerage infrastructure was improved significantly in 2017, with the completion of a tunnel 3.1 miles, 5.0 kilometers long, which provides 20 by 106 imp gal, 90 milliliters, of storm water storage. It will reduce the risk of flooding and the likelihood that sewage will overflow into the Clyde during storms. Since 2002, clean water provision and sewerage have been the responsibility of Scottish Water. Although Glasgow Corporation had been a pioneer in the municipal socialist movement from the late 19th century, since the Representation of the People Act 1918, Glasgow increasingly supported left-wing ideas and politics at a national level. The city council was controlled by the Labour Party for over 30 years, since the decline of the Progressives. Since 2007, when local government elections in Scotland began to use the single transferable vote rather than the first-past-the-post system, the dominance of the Labour Party within the city started to decline. As a result of the 2017 United Kingdom local elections, the SNP was able to form a minority administration ending Labour's 37 years of uninterrupted control. This video will continue in part 2.